Welcome back to Ohio Counseling Conversations, the official podcast of the Ohio Counseling Association, bringing you updates and conversations from around the state. In today's episode, we're joined by the lovely Brooks Collins Gaines, the Director of Behavioral Health at the iPromise Health Quarters in Akron, Ohio. Join us as we discuss her mission of reducing mistrust in healthcare systems, particularly for Black communities. We explore the impact of racial trauma on mental health and how her work aims to create accessible, safe spaces for those seeking care while addressing systemic barriers. And I'm your host today, Dr. Marissa Cargill, a counselor in Northeast Ohio and counselor educator at the University of Akron. Let's dig in. Welcome back to Ohio Counseling Conversations. We are so excited today because we are joined by one of my friends, colleagues, and someone who has worked in the community for quite some time, Brooks Collins Gaines. Brooks, thank you for joining us today. Excited to have you.
Hi, Marissa. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and so we felt it was really important. As an organization, OCA supports this as well as the podcast. We want to make sure that we're representing people who've worked and worn many hats in the field. And so I know that you can speak to that, but please tell our listeners just a little bit about yourself.
I guess I can start with when I graduated, of course, like way back, I started in working in early childhood. Well, initially working with adolescents with a local mental health agency, and then kind of like moved into working in early childhood and doing some supervision. A lot of my early work was really prevention focused with folks in the Akron community and really focus on parenting, child rearing, early adolescent challenges. And then again, things related to like preschool population and trying to ensure behaviors were reduced. I then transitioned into work in a one of our local children's hospitals where I did work with teenagers who were dealing with like safety concerns, so suicidal ideation and self harm behaviors. Absolutely love that work. I absolutely love working with adolescents. They're so fun. And then more recently, kind of transitioned into back into a management and supervision role, working to build something for our community focused on culturally competent care and really meeting the needs of the community at large.
I love that. And so that's part of your journey in mental health, leading you now to this current role as the director of the I Promise Health Quarters. Is that right?
So I'm the director of the behavioral health component. So I work for Coleman Health
Okay.
Services, and we partner with Access Point Health Center, and they provide the medical care. So we do a lot of integrated healthcare services for the community. But yes, I'm the director of
Behavioral health.
the behavioral health.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay. And so this journey in community mental health, like how did it lead you to this new role?
I don't know if this is like a long story, but I'm going to try to summarize it. But so when I was working in like with preschoolers and like a toddlers and preschooler succeeding program, we there was a lot of research done on expulsion rates of preschoolers being higher, 3 times higher than that of school age students. So that was a concern. I'm going into the preschools, and I was doing some management and supervision at that point also. But when I was going into the schools or these daycare centers and preschool centers, I was noticing and reading up on a lot of the disparities in treatment in the education field. And I'm noticing a lot of children of color were getting expelled at higher rates, even than their white counterparts. And that, of course, was like concerning to me. Like just in general, that preschoolers were getting expelled, just
Yeah.
period. And then that children of color were being expelled at higher rates, disproportionate to their peers, specifically Black boys, even more so than even Black girls.
Mhm.
So that kind of like started the ball rolling for me, really noticing that there was like different disparities in various areas. So decided to go back and get my PhD because I wanted to be able to learn how to do
Mhm.
research, and to be able to focus my research area. And so that is some of my focus area on not specifically youth, but people of color and some of the disparities. So that kind of led me into like my passion of research and doing looking into some of those, just not just in school and preschool, but also medical, mental health field, all of those types of things. Took a break, was working in this hospital, like I said, and then this job literally just fell in my lap. So my passion is really to focus on creating something in the community that feels safe, that's trauma informed, that families can feel safe bringing their kids and know that they're not going to be labeled. I really would love to be able to do more in the schools, but the iPromise Health Quarters is connected to a school.
Mhm.
So it kind of like leaned into that.
Yeah, yeah. There's that community connection in like a lot of
Mhm.
different directions,
Yep,
other systems within the
exactly.
community. I love that. So, knowing that you've been really in the local community spaces for such a good portion of your career, what unique challenges do you see in serving the mental health field needs of Akron or like even communities like Akron, especially with underrepresented populations?
So one of the things that I found recently is that, and been talking with some of the other local community providers, we like here specifically in Summit County in Akron, we are like we talk about how we are resource rich but communication poor. Like that's been
Mm,
something I've heard saying through a lot of different organizations. So we have tons of resources here in this particular community. Not other communities like us really have as many resources as we do here. The problem is that our community providers, or the challenges, I shouldn't say problem, the challenge is the communication and providers recognizing what's out there and when to send people to who, and not feeling the need to like sort of monopolize or hold all the clients because there's plenty of folks that need services. And so trying to make sure that we're collaborating. So I think on our end, that is the challenge, us not knowing how to get the word out that there's so many different services out there. But
mhm,
I think also for the folks in our community, not really knowing where to go, not trusting the systems, as I mentioned before.
mhm.
They might know that this is out there, but they may have had a bad experience at this location or someone else had, but then not knowing where else to go for services.
Yeah. Oh, my communication heart is like, yep, communication. It's at the foundation for a lot
Yeah.
of things. So I understand that that is sometimes a big challenge for a lot of
Mhm.
organizations as well as like individuals of just kind of understanding um, where and how to get information from people. So totally get it. I'm like, all right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so true. It's like, I talk to families, and sometimes I remember when I first came into this particular position, I've been living in Akron my entire life. And I remember coming into this position and I'm meeting all of these people from other organizations. And I'm like, how long have you been around? They're like, oh, we've been here for 5 years, or we've been here for 10 years. And I'm like, why did I've been doing this for about 25 years now. How is it that I don't know anything about you? And so now, like, there's more and more collaboration that I'm trying to do intentionally to
Mhm,
make sure that folks know that we're not the be all end all stop
mhm.
for services, that there's so many other options for services that want to do some of the same things that
Yeah,
we want to provide.
yeah. And that's such an important part of our professional identity is making sure we are collaborating. So I appreciate
Yeah.
you speaking to it. You mentioned the passion for reducing like mistrust in
Mhm.
systems, especially as it pertains to Black folks in the community. Can you talk or speak to some of the key reasons for the mistrust and how you see it impacting mental health access and care?
Yeah, so of course, with my research, it's been like disheartening to learn even a lot of the things that I didn't know prior to researching things. You know, we know surface level things like people hear a lot about the Tuskegee experiment, right?
Mhm.
Tuskegee syphilis experiment. And people have had their personal experiences going to medical doctors where they're not being seen or heard. We know that the rates of the mental or maternal fetal death is high for
Mhm.
Black women. Infant mortality is high for people of color. So we know that those things happen, and we know that oftentimes those things could have been prevented, like loss of life could have been prevented in certain situations. And we see on the news all of the different things systemically that happen to people of color, specifically Black folks, even as it relates to law enforcement or the judicial system, right? The legal system, higher rates of incarceration, right? And there's this book that I've been reading, that I've gone through and continue to read, that's called Medical Apartheid, right? Apartheid, that is like ridiculously informative. Harriet Washington is the author, and she speaks so much throughout with so much research about various areas in which Black folks specifically have been um, mistreated from going to grave robbing, right, to do medical research on and like destroying the bodies of Black folks when people were thinking their loved one was buried. So I think it comes down really to largely systemic mistrust, right? Because
Mhm.
historically, going way back and not stopping, um, people of color, specifically Black folks, have been experiencing various ways of, I want to just say the shadiness, right?
Mhm.
Some really, really shady stuff that has happened from system to system to system. Housing, right? Medical, mental health, even, right? Judicial system or the legal system. Just about every educational system, every system that you could think of in this country, people of color, Black folks, have been marginalized and left out or mistreated. We get diagnosed at higher rates with things like schizophrenia, ADHD, a lot of different diagnoses when people in our community, specifically our mental health community, aren't asking the questions or leaning into the potential why is a Black man not trusting the system or feeling paranoid. Why does he feel paranoid? Well, because
Mhm.
history says that he should be in order to be cautious, in order to stay safe. So I think all of the historic things that have happened um, by systems to Black people have caused people of color, Black folks, also to truly not feel safe coming
Mhm.
and asking for help. And it doesn't matter that I'm a Black woman, I'm a part of a system, right?
Mhm.
So it doesn't matter that
Mhm.
you're a white woman, you're a part of a system. So we have
Right.
to do all the things that we can to show people that they can trust us.
Mhm. Yeah. And there are consequences like for people who have tried to trust the system historically as well, right?
Hmm.
And I think we speak to that with like conversation about diagnoses, right?
Right.
I think in my own work, particularly with women of color, like maybe a bipolar disorder,
Hmm.
and there's also presence of trauma
Hmm.
history. And so it's like, wait a minute,
Yeah.
when you got that label from a previous provider, like, was this taken into account?
Yeah. Absolutely. I think really, and like, yes, this is mental health. We tie a lot of things, though. I think the mental health field and the medical field, there's so much overlap into, I think, why people of color don't trust systems. Is it
Mhm.
okay for me to share some personal stuff?
Yeah, whatever you want to
So,
share.
and I think you know this, I've talked to you about this. So, personally, I've experienced as an educated Black woman, I've experienced going into a doctor's office, going into the hospital to seek care. And because I had on a hoodie and some sweatpants, my hair in a messy bun, because I was in pain, significant pain, I was minimized. It was kind of like pushed to the side for 6 hours to the point where literally after that, I could have died. Like I almost died. And when I follow up and I read about the history of people of color specifically being in dying at higher rates because their pain was ignored. Um, it's unfortunate, and it will make a person, even myself, have like a trauma response to a hospital or a system that is supposed to care for me ethically, right?
Right.
And we are as counselors, right, in this field, we are ethically expected and should want to be caring and empathetic to what people are going through. And unfortunately, what happens in the medical field can sometimes trickle over into how people view our system as well.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And then emotional pain is minimized.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so after you deal with something like that, do you feel safe going to relive the trauma with someone who might say to you, well, is it possible that the hospital was just really busy that day and kind of dismiss the true lived experience that you might have had? You know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah. It was real because you lived it.
It was real because I lived it, right? Or not even just me, other women or
Right.
other men,
Yeah.
and these aren't isolated to just people of color, but on larger scales, disproportionately,
Yeah.
right?
The frequency and severity disproportionately, delivered.
Affects, yeah,
Yeah.
people of color.
Um, so I am curious, how do you see the work being done with the I Promise headquarters aligning with your mission to rebuild this trust within the communities, especially for those who maybe have historically been mistreated by these systems?
So this building has only been open since July. We had our open house in July. So we're still building up. But over the past year, since we've been in practice, I'll say, our focus has predominantly been on building relationships with folks in our community, like largely. Like I'm talking about a year's worth of meetings with other community providers, building relationships, collaborating, identifying ways that we can work together to form groups that might serve our that might serve our families and our community better. Even from the even as simple as how do we refer to the folks that we serve? Do we call them clients or do we call them um, family members? Do we call them community members? Like, how do we refer to these folks, right? Like, as simple as those things. What promise do we have from the I Promise Health Quarters? What promise do we have to serve our community? We have it plastered on our wall when you walk into our building. From the moment you walk in, the feel should be safe. The folks who are sitting at our front desk, they greet them friendly. We hope that they will recognize them after a while, that they might say, hey, John, it's good to see you today. So and so will be right with you. That means, on
Mhm.
whether it's on the medical side or the behavioral health side, we want our front desk folks to meet them. But largely, it really has been relationship building. You're not gonna come to us, another agency in the community meant to do something,
Mhm.
if we're not coming out to you to make sure that you see that we are also part of your community and we want this to be good for you,
Mhm.
and listening to what it is their needs are. Like, so talking and listening, what is it that you need from us? What needs to be different? Um, just kind of really becoming part of it.
Mhm. That like person centered, trauma informed, like
Absolutely.
idea of meeting people both physically, emotionally, mentally where they are.
Absolutely, 100%. Like, we literally I feel like we're at, the House 330 across the street several times a week. Like, they know us now. Like, they're like, "Hey, Brooks," and I'm like, "Hey." Like, it's great. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We see them sometimes at events. Sometimes that can feel awkward initially because these are folks that you're hoping to serve, but the truth is that they see us being normal, regular people,
Mhm.
um,
Community
and
members.
we're community members, right?
Yeah.
And if I'm being frank, like, so the I Promise LeBron James Family Foundation, I Promise World, like one of their mantras is we are family, right? So we really want to live by what the ideal, right, of family is, and not everybody comes from the same family background. Family doesn't mean the same thing to everyone,
Mhm.
but ultimately family, we don't have to always get along, but ultimately family is supportive. We want the best for you,
Mhm.
and what can we do to help? I can't fix everything, but I can help you to get to where you can
Mhm.
to to change some of the things in your life,
Mhm.
even if it's not me doing it
Yeah, I can be with you on that.
on that journey.
Yeah,
Yep.
I like that. You spoke to these historical and even present experiences that Black folks experience at exponentially higher rates,
Mhm.
this racial trauma. And um, I think we can acknowledge that it does deeply affect people and their community, but I'm curious, like how specifically you address it in this field of work in counseling and some common themes or struggles you see when people are seeking mental health support.
So what I've noticed is that folks don't often come into counseling sharing, people of color specific, like we don't go to a counselor and say, I'm experiencing racial trauma. This doesn't happen. It's not seen that way. Um, and I don't know if this is answering your question. I think here, one of the things that I'll hope that all of my therapists will do, each and every one of us in the behavioral health area, um, that each of us will do will be to broach that conversation, right? It's something that I'll be doing in supervision. We're going to be getting more training on it to ensure that our staff are well equipped and feel safe and know how to broach the conversation. Um, but I think bringing it up in a way that doesn't feel awkward,
Mhm.
because if you ask the question in an awkward way, people are going to be like, no. As a Black woman, and one of the things I do know is that Black folks oftentimes function to protect other people's feelings. We've had to for survival, right? We had to be very careful about what we say for survival, and it's natural. We don't put our business out there. This is counseling. I'm not going to tell you everything. I don't expect to necessarily have all people of color operating out of this place. And so, um, and even if I did, every single person who's here doesn't have the same lived experiences of the people in our community, even if you are a person of color. And so being able to broach that conversation and say, um, so, right now, a lot of things are happening in the world, or over the last 5 to 10 years, we've been seeing a lot of these things happening. Does this affect you? Or how might this affect you? It might even be more of an open ended question, right?
Mhm.
And then if a person says it doesn't really affect me, or, oh, yeah, this has affected me in this way because I worry about my son, driving. He just started driving. And so this is how it impacts me. My anxiety is heightened because of this. Um, but we have to know how to ask the question. But we have to first recognize these things actually happen in the world
Mhm.
and are happening to people. And again, this is not just about Black folks. Like we serve all diverse groups of people. We serve people who are Hispanic or Asian, Asian Indian or Burmese, or we serve the LGBTQ population. So I want all of the folks from diverse communities to feel safe, and we have like an environment. Like, what does my office look like? Does my office speak to a safe space? Do I have a flag sitting here because I need anybody who's in the LGBTQ community and other things to know that when they walk in this room, they're safe,
Mhm.
Um, and so I think from the moment you walk in, creating that safety environment, but also ensuring that our folks are trained and know how to broach the conversation.
Yeah, making sure that that willingness on the clinician
Hmm.
there to have the conversations, especially with clients who may not trust that, like,
Hmm.
this person can have this conversation with me, or may just not be comfortable opening into that conversation, like,
Yeah,
early on. Yeah. Um,
yeah.
for clinicians, given that you have some counselor education experience as well, what steps do you feel like clinicians can do to be more attuned to, like, recognizing racial trauma in a clinical setting?
So I was thinking about this actually a couple of days ago. Um, like how do our clinicians, how am I supposed to train my staff as they're coming in,
Mhm.
and as an educator, how would I hope that students are aware? So self-education, right? Being self-taught, because we get what, like one multicultural counseling class, and it's, it does, there's so many different cultures, so to be
Yeah.
able to do that in one class is pretty, it's going to be skimming the surface, right?
Mhm.
Of really how to work with the populations of folks that we truly will be serving. And so I think really doing a lot of research on your own. A lot of people might think that they need to speak to more folks of those various diverse backgrounds, and yet it's a yes and.
Mhm.
Like, yes, you need to hear people's lived experiences, trust that their lived experiences are true, listen with an open heart and empathetic ear, and read. Like, I swear these books, like this book, this medical apartheid book, The like truly critical race theory is a book to kind of help you to understand how systems have impacted people. I think that is really the basis of understanding the systemic um, injustices that have been happening to folks on a larger scale, that have caused them to have a hard time. And if you truly understand those things, I think it'll open your eyes and your hearts differently to understanding how to meet people where they're at. But I also think so. I saw this. I know you love TikToks and stuff and social media stuff. I know that's your jam,
Sure
to some extent.
is.
And so I saw this TikTok yesterday. I was thinking about you when I saw it too. I was like, "Ooh, I'm going to talk about this to when I see Marissa." So it was a white woman who was going into social work, and she made the decision to go to an HBCU,
Mm,
and someone commented on her post, why would you choose an HBCU? They weren't being disrespectful. It was just a true, honest question. Why would you choose an HBCU as a white woman? You guys have all the schools to choose from. And her answer was so humbling. It was like, because yes, I can go. She said, I waited until the last minute to apply because I didn't want to take away from other people who might want to be in this school. And my goal is to serve a certain to provide services in social work, and I need to know and understand the community that I'll likely be working with. Like, people of color in her community is the population that she would largely be working with. So she's basically wanted to immerse herself in um, learning from Black professors, learning from Black students, being around that, and learning history that she would otherwise not necessarily learn to the depth at a school that was predominantly white. And so I have to give a lot of respect to her, because being a white person that has all the opportunities to be able to go anywhere likely that you want to, and you choose to go, not HBC HBCUs are great, but you choose to go to an HBCU because you know the value that you'll get immersing yourself in a culture of people that you will be serving. Just speaks to her devotion, um, to the population that she's going to be serving. So I think that plays a role also, immersing yourself. It doesn't, you can go to whatever school, but making sure that you're not siloed in with people who look like you, only people who look like you.
mhm.
That goes for Black folks too. Like, not being siloed to only being around people who look like you. Um, Engaging with people who look differently, reading books that are about people who might be diverse.
Mm.
Um, yeah.
Okay. I think it's important for us as professionals, right, to feel like, hey, we can set an example. We could show people the way. Um, what role do you feel like we as professionals have in dismantling systemic racism, both like within healthcare or broader systems?
I think that that is our one of our roles, right? As part of our professional identity, in my opinion, it aligns, right? Advocacy, right? Learning about the people that you are meant to serve, and that doesn't even mean that if even if you're not providing direct clinical service, because a lot of us don't end up continuing just providing direct clinical service, we might be teaching folks who will be. So I think it's important to like ensure that, I don't know, I think it's important that we are advocating. I truly don't understand how we can be in this profession and not work toward dismantling systemic issues, including systemic racism. I don't know how we can be in this field and not choose human rights, right? And not choose to work towards what is going to help the people that we serve be well. And those are the things that help the people we serve be well.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And although I think when you hear this term, I know like a lot of people immediately will like be rolling their eyes. When we think about how much we're taught to make sure we're also using evidence-based practice,
Absolutely.
it's like, okay, the evidence is there to say where these
Absolutely.
systems have been harmful and where, denying people these human rights can actually have severe consequences. Like, why are we still doing this? Why is this the practice? And that might be because
Amen.
of these other systems that are trying to, make people fit in boxes that they don't fit into. Um,
Yeah,
and so I think it speaks to that advocacy piece so well. Yeah.
absolutely. I've been trying to understand that, even during, and while in my master's program and even during the doctoral program, looking at my professional identity and understanding the role that I have, like it aligns with who I am as a person. Not everybody is the same way. Everybody's different, like my personal values,
Hmm.
and personal beliefs. And if I were to set that aside, if I know that there are certain things systemically that are impacting the people that I'm meant to serve, in order to, like, the goal is wellness, right? The goal is for the people that we're working with to feel whole and accepted and have access to the same things that everyone else has access to. And it is my duty to do whatever I can to do advocacy on the outside, but also to help support them in knowing how to advocate for themselves, if possible, depending on where they're at, right? Developmentally or as far as what they're capable of doing. But it's my job to do some advocacy systemically, speaking out against it whenever I can, researching it so that I can know better how to serve them, like one on one or in group settings or community wide. Even when it comes to voting and so on and so forth, like all of those things matter.
Hmm. Oh, I'm glad that you spoke to voting. Yeah. By the time this episode is published, we passed election day, but I think it's not lost on any counselor any time of the year that how we vote, how we show up in spaces serves us as members of the community, but also in
Mhm.
our profession, and that they can have consequences on the profession, um, certain candidates, certain legislation, all of these things. And so being an involved community member locally, at the state level and even at the national level are all really relevant and important parts of our professional identity as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
You spoke to like this balance though of like individual needs with community and systemic needs. How do you find yourself really making sure you're attending to those individual mental health needs for someone as well as those larger systemic issues when they're encountering racism or discrimination and poverty?
I don't know if this is as simple as, asking folks and talking to them about what it is that they need to focus on, right? What I can say is that I know sometimes folks aren't yet ready to deal with the systemic stuff.
Mhm.
It's too heavy.
Yeah.
And some, you know what I mean? And so I can't go in there jumping in ready to change the world for them or helping them to do all the things systemically or even addressing those systemic things. They might feel too overwhelming and too big because they are big, right?
Yeah.
Those things are huge. They definitely trickle down. So I think really focusing on, well, what's happening right now for you? And maybe the systemic stuff is happening right now for them. So how do we break this down into smaller bits and pieces that, we can address? And I don't know if that's answering the question. Um, but I think really attuning to what it is that the individual is needing to focus on,
Mhm.
um, as it would be with any other situation that you might be dealing with the client.
Not ignoring the macro level stuff, but also finding ways to help clients digest what they can as
Hmm.
they can. I think
Yeah.
it's important helping them name stuff is part of it,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
also just I always laugh because I think of the phrase like clients have shared with me. I think it came from like 12 steps, but like how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? And so it's like making it like piece by piece, step by step.
Yeah.
And I'm always like
And the
baby steps or steps forward. You can do what
yeah.
you do in that.
So the systemic stuff could be like work related, right? I might be dealing with some systemic racism at work. And so we might focus on one part of that, holistically. And maybe they may, and truly some people don't even know, um, or don't want to acknowledge or admit that certain things might be systemic racism.
Yeah.
And like you said, call it out because sometimes it does require, I can even speak for myself. Like there have been times that I wanted to, as a Black woman, deny that this is a race issue because I don't want things to be a race
Yeah.
issue, right? I don't want people to look at me and automatically treat me a certain way because I'm a Black woman.
Mhm.
And so sometimes it's easy to deny, I don't think that that's because of race, or I don't want that because I don't want it to be. And sometimes I think it's important to have people in your life, which I have, that have been able to say, Brooks, no, that absolutely sounds like a race issue. So let's talk about it. Thank God I have a lot of counselor friends
I'm always
who
very
can do,
grateful for that.
else, I mean, you included, like, that have been able to, like, say those things to me at times. And so having had that experience myself, I think sometimes it does not everybody is ready to hear that. I
Mhm.
think knowing where people are at in their racial identity,
Yeah.
right? I think
Yes.
that's a huge piece that sometimes we forget about and we need to not forget about because every person of color and every person is at a different stage of their racial identity
Yeah.
development. And so I can't assume that every Black person that comes in is at the same place that I'm at when it comes. So they may not be ready to hear that. So we might, again, take it in those smaller pieces.
Yeah, definitely. What are your hopes for the future of community mental health care, especially in addressing the needs of communities of color?
So, one of the things I didn't get to actually talk about as much that I think is really important too, as it relates to like my hope for the future, I think is like that. I talked a little bit about that pairing of medical and mental health care, and aligning those two. And so, of course, the integrated care that we're providing here is to make things a lot more seamless and a lot easier for families to be able to access all the care that they need: dental, vision, medical, pediatrics, pharmacy, lab work, and behavioral health care here in this location. Substance use needs, if they're at that point, peer support, all the things that they might need um, in one location that they learn to trust. My hope is that more places can collaborate so that our folks, our community members, the people we serve, don't feel discombobulated. I don't know, like torn apart and just confused about what to do or where to go. I want our communication to be better. I want folks to be able to feel safe to go anywhere. I don't want this place or any other place to be a monolith. Like I want the folks in I would love, ideally, of course, we all know that this is not going to happen. So this is just a dream, that caseloads weren't so high in community mental health serve agencies, like so that people could actually do what they went to school to do. Like we went into this not because we're getting paid big bucks. We went into this because we want to serve people, and people struggle to serve with the best care, best practices because they have a lot on their plate. And so I hope that we can have more people who are skilled and qualified to provide the services so the caseloads won't be as daunting and heavy, and there's more collaboration so the caseloads don't have to be so daunting and overwhelming, so that our people in our community can actually have um, true, careful, intentional, culturally and trauma informed, competent care. Um,
Mhm.
period.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that at the start of your career that prevention was part of like the
It still
element
is.
because it speaks to what you're just saying here is that like all with integrating like do we take a prevention approach because there's like lots of
Mhm.
places to check in and touch points where like when you're trying to navigate 5 different systems because I gotta go to this specialist
Mhm.
and this caseworker and this doctor, like, it shifts where, like, you don't know what's up, what's down, like, what's good. But integrating gives us that prevention approach to help smooth out these bumpy roads and really pave a way forward. So, both for the community that's being served and the people serving the community.
Absolutely, absolutely, like, we need that too.
Yeah, yeah, it
You
helps.
know what I mean?
Yeah, it when you cast a wide net, what they say, like it
Yeah.
helps everyone. So I think that's not lost on me. Point.
Prevention is my heart, like, truly is, like, a heart of my hearts. I don't know if I said that right. It it really is my heart. It
Yeah.
really is because if we could do more education, right? Um, with folks in our community, if we could do a lot of group work that didn't necessarily need to be clinical, parenting, right? Like if we could do a lot of those types of like community, if we could do a lot more of those types of things, things that aren't necessarily billable,
Hmm.
I really wonder um, how many folks in our community are still going to need as much clinical work
Yeah.
if we can actually attend to things prior to them getting. Same thing with like if you take your vitamins, right? Which I don't judge me on a regular basis.
Depends on the day.
If you take your vitamins every day and you eat healthy and you drink water,
Mhm,
you're less likely to have to go to the doctor in between like regular visits, right?
mhm,
Or, annual visits. And so it's the same idea. If you can learn if you can learn skills to prevent these mental health crises or challenges, if you could teach parents ways to kind of manage issues with their children as youth, as adolescents, as young adults, all the things,
mhm.
um, maybe they might be a little bit differently prepared.
Yeah,
You know what I
for
mean?
sure. Uh,
Prevention is super important.
yeah, it's education, which
Mhm.
I know is in both
Mhm.
our hearts. Uh,
Mhm.
Speaking of education, I guess this might answer some of this next question, but what advice or approach would you recommend for like supporting mental health professionals in really recognizing the impact of racial trauma on their clients? How do they um, gain more education or support?
I think connect when as it relates to racial trauma, I think reaching out to people who might be educators who might have like some ways to go, like be able to point you in the right direction to start. So of course, if you're still a student, talking to your professors or your instructors, like where can I kind of gather more information about this particular topic? I think there's so much access, like truly, there's a lot of research out there. Type it in Google Scholar, like literally, you can go anywhere to access information on racial trauma and how it impacts people as far as their mental health and physical health. Again, they tie together. Like, so how can we really, like, what are some things that I can do? And if we're really looking at it as it relates to mental health, we always can kind of see um, in the research what are things that we can specifically do, right? So, being attuned, listening to the folks that we serve, hearing their stories and their lived experiences, meeting them where they're at. There's a lot of listening involved initially when you're working with a person who's dealing with racial trauma, like true, like with any trauma, really. Um, any trauma, like listening to their experience from their perspective. But I think really identifying the resources might mean talking to people who might have that expertise, finding the experts.
Mhm.
Like I mentioned before, like reading some different books that, like I mentioned earlier, that might help get the ball rolling. That kind of leads you to other like resources from the research that they've done. Um, but yeah, so I think education. You said it.
Yeah. I appreciate you saying that. I hear it and I think about like so many examples where yeah, we have the class and I like to see that, some courses are infusing more multicultural,
Hmm.
um, competent textbooks and things of
Hmm.
that nature that are infusing this into more than just like one course. But even so, like uh, with new professionals, I guess like because I think of new professionals and students so much as a counselor educator that not to abandon everything you've learned, but maybe pause before going into like, oh, CBT will do this here. Yes, and
Yes, and
there might be part of that where we can't challenge it. This wasn't a negative belief or a negative core belief. This is someone's lived experience. And so we have to be careful
Mhm,
with like how we approach clients. And so you may feel really well skilled in some areas, but if you're not sure, like pause, get the consultation,
mhm,
the supervision that you need to
yeah,
make sure that you're responding in culturally appropriate ways.
Yeah, and I think motivational interviewing, right? That's something that you could absolutely use to kind of just be present
Hmm.
and know how to engage and how to let the person kind of talk. We are really quick to kind of utilize like things like CBT, to challenge a person's core beliefs. And while yes, that might be necessary to a certain at some point, it may not be right now because you might ostracize a person who's already experienced some like dismissiveness in society.
Right.
So I think it's really important for us to like truly, truly listen and be where they're at. Build that relationships are always going to be important for diverse populations because most diverse populations are relational.
Hmm.
They're most of them family is not just mom, dad, siblings. They're not like individualistic, right? They're, you know, so I think really kind of being there, listening, understanding where they're at. Um, and once they feel safe and once you feel like that relationship, once they feel like
Yeah.
that relationship is solid, really, not so much you, but once they feel like that relationship is solid, then you might be able to ask that question, maybe even ask permission. Is it okay for me to challenge this thought?
Yeah.
They might be like, "No, I'm not ready for that." And that's okay, right? Like, it's okay to ask permission, to, like, do something with someone that has dealt with a lot of, like, dismissiveness or gaslighting, right? Systemic gaslighting,
Yeah, and
right?
that's where I feel
So
like the caution of CBT, like, it could be so useful. We know there's evidence base, but that, like, it could come across as like me dismissing or like not attending to the lived
mhm,
experience because it's maybe it's negative, but it's true. This is what you experienced, and can
absolutely.
systems shape negative core beliefs about someone? Sure, and we can help educate, but not without the relationship there first.
Right. I think the other thing that we kind of forget about specifically as it relates to Black folks, and a lot of people don't even know this, that we talk about like Eastern like interventions like mindfulness and all of those types of things. Those actually come from like African centric tools.
Mhm,
Like those are actually definitely kind of go back into like Afrocentric like methods of healing.
mhm,
So a lot of the things that we do that are more holistic, connecting people to the earth and grounding and spiritual to some extent, not religious, but spiritually focused,
mhm.
are ways of healing also. Like I think we forget some of that too. Like the interventions that we utilize may not necessarily always have to be cognitive
Right.
when we're dealing with a person who's dealing with like systemic racial trauma,
Mhm.
right? A lot of the things that we're doing might need to be a little bit more holistic
Yeah.
um, for them.
Right. Right. Any final messages you'd like to share with the listeners about the importance of addressing individual or collective racial trauma?
So I think, thank you for asking that question. I think this is it's like this is a passion of mine. This is my heart and soul, and I think when we're working with people who are in the Black community, I want folks to really truly understand more than anything, if they walk away with anything, to really be present with the person and to not make assumptions, to not assume that they are like the Black person who was in your office before, right? Like there's diversity among people of color. There's diversity among Black folks, right? But also recognize that most, if not all, have experienced some form of discrimination or racism, um, specifically related to their race, like discriminatory practices specifically related to their race,
Mhm.
not necessarily just looking at the intersections of identities, but just looking at the race as it stands. And then if you focus a little bit more, if you even acknowledge some of the other intersecting identities, how those things play a role. So I think meeting them, we do this with everyone, of course. I think listening to the lived experiences of a person of color, believing what they say, and I think letting them have some power in their treatment and guiding them into letting them guide the therapeutic interventions. Because again, like we just talked about, CBT is not going to necessarily work for every Black person. And it may not always be what's best. What do they need? Do they need more sensory integration? Do they need more? Um, do they need sand tray?
Mhm.
Right? Do they need to walk and talk? Do they need to play basketball and talk? Like, what is it that they need
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
for healing? But I think really meeting them where they're at.
I like what you said about giving them power, and
Mhm.
I think that is such a cool way to frame it to the client.
Yeah. Maybe like empowering, maybe not give them power. Maybe I need to change
Yeah,
that because
I
it's not mine to give. You know what I
empowering them, but,
mean?
like,
Yeah.
saying, "I want you to
Empower.
feel like you have power and you're
Yes.
creating it." And so if it's helpful for
Yes.
us
This is yours.
to maybe, like, go for a walk when we have our sessions, like, I'm happy
Mhm.
to do that because I think movement helps us process, and,
Absolutely.
um,
Yes.
the just feeling like, "Oh, I have a choice," like, this is
Yes.
different than maybe
Yes.
the other
Doesn't
system.
have to be. Yep. This doesn't have to be you sitting in front of me and me asking you a bunch of questions and you answering them, and me just challenging you nonstop. Like, it can also, I mean, that probably is necessary too sometimes. Um, but I think when you're dealing with racial trauma specifically, I think when that's the issue, being very mindful and very cautious of, excuse me, how you're challenging them
Mhm,
and what the challenges are. You got to be very careful because you don't want to be another system that dismisses their reality.
right, right. So we ask this last question on every episode. The name of the podcast is Ohio Counseling Conversations. So, Brooks, what important conversations do you think counseling professionals should be having with each other or their clients in our state?
Yes. So of course I would have said this, but we're having it. So I'm gonna say this. But I really think like I was thinking about this question and I want to hear more. I feel like a lot of counselors are staying away from youth. Like don't touch youth. Like they people don't want to work with young people. And I don't know like I'm talking about even early childhood.
Yeah.
Because that's an issue. Like there's a lot of folks in the early childhood world, kids and families that are dealing with like mental health issues, and that's something that I think we need to talk a little bit more about. Yes, that's another diverse population that we tend to ignore. We talk about racial, we talk about gender, we talk about older people, but and we might talk about adolescents even to some extent.
Mhm.
We don't talk a lot about early childhood mental health
Yeah. Yeah.
enough.
Yeah. And uh, it's not lost on me. I've been one of those people who's been like, I don't know if I can work with children. So I understand like that speaks to me directly, although I know that wasn't your intention. I get it.
No, it wasn't my
No,
intention
I
at
know
all.
that.
We like teenagers.
Yeah, there's fear around it, but there's also a need
Yeah,
for it, and,
absolutely.
uh, I think that speaks to the family systems too, right? Like, because
Absolutely.
oftentimes that, uh, work with younger children is also working with their parents, and
It
it goes
is.
back to that
It's systemic.
connection conversation we're having, and, it's all connected, and so it's important
It is.
that we are paying attention to all parts of the system, to your point.
Yes. So I think that is the area that I feel like and I wasn't saying it specifically to you
No,
because
I
I
know.
can think of so Coleman was originally only adults. It wasn't until recently that Coleman started working with youth. And this location, the intention is to really focus on all age groups. And again, I come from early childhood and adolescence. That's where my passion and where my heart has always been. And I go places and I talk to other counselors, and they're like, "Oh, I don't do kids." Even when I was teaching, um, and I'm like, "What is it that you want to do?" And they're like, "I'm like, how many of you want to work with kids?" They're like, "None of us. Nobody want." Like everybody's hands are like under the table. And we talk about why, and they talk about that fear. Um, and and then I get a lot of parents who are like limited to like one or two agencies
Mhm.
that serve youth.
Yeah.
Um, and there's just and there's not as many therapists who are comfortable
Mhm.
with or feel confident. So I think that's an area that I would love for us to have more conversation about.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Well, we're so glad that you joined us. I think you're leaving us with so many seeds that I hope grow for myself and the listeners. But is there anything else you'd like to add? Did we miss?
No, ma'am.
Well, thank you so
That's
much,
great.
Brooks. We're so happy to have you. And listeners, we are happy to have you. Hope you'll join us next time on Ohio Counseling Conversations. Have a good one.
Ohio Counseling Conversations is on a mission to make this podcast meaningful to you, and we can't do that without your help. A feedback form is linked in the show notes for this episode and is also available on the OCA Linktree. If you have any recommendations for topics or guests or any other general feedback, you can let us know by using the form. We welcome your thoughts so that we can continue to develop the podcast and grow as creators. If you are interested in joining the team or being a guest, you can also reach us by emailing ohiocounselingconversations@gmail.com. We value your insight. Thank you so much for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to follow us so you can stay up to date with Ohio Counseling Conversations online and wherever you listen to podcasts.
This podcast is brought to you by the Ohio Counseling Association's Media, Public Relations, and Membership Committee and its podcast subcommittee. This podcast features original music selections by Elijah Satoru Wood and our closing song, Accretion Discotheque by Who AD. Views, beliefs, or references mentioned in this episode do not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by the Ohio Counseling Association. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the podcast does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Views and opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect the view of the Ohio Counseling Association or any of its officials. Thank you.